Hi everyone. I'm seated now with a steaming mug of mate, Yerba or Yerba mate. This product has a touch of caffeine, just a low amount. It's been marketed for probably close to a decade now, and this is from my stash, which is well over a year old. I got some of the conveniently bagged mate tea bags from a popular organic brand. I repackaged them, so I'm not certain which brand it was, but I think it was Guyaki. I'm fairly certain about that. And I've gotten their spritzers, kind of their drinks. I do recommend, if you see it, they have one called Classic Gold in a very slim aluminum can. It has flavors of tamarind and lime, so it's an unusual one. Often you'll see the grapefruit one, or and maybe the other one is like cranberry, but those are inferior if you'd like more of a savory, more of a unique and an unusual taste. I've also gotten the big cans of Guyaki mate. I think generally I'd get the plain one. I do like to have a low caffeine dose occasionally. I also really like to have a little bit of a change or a shake-up in my usual caffeine intake. I do love coffee, I love tea, but occasionally if I'm heavily consuming it, I do get a bit burnt out, so it's nice to still be able to have my caffeine and drink it too. So I've chosen 2 tea bags and I'm at full dinosaur, so the mug is full. You can see that the bone structures are all in effect, and I'm going to just review it. When it was first marketed, they tried to slip it into the health food world and made probably all kinds of claims about it, but it does have its own unique ritual, and it's very, very, very popular, I understand, in the countries where it's grown, overtaking even, I believe, coffee intake maybe in some areas. And although I don't have one, it's traditionally drunk out of a gourd. The way that they're often marketed is kind of a nice hollowed out gourd, cleaned or at least rudimentary swabbing of the inside with a little bit of a pressed tin or a metal lip, creating just basically a cup, a gourd, natural gourd cup, the metal rim, and then it's drank from a straw, traditional metal straw. We can just imagine this is one. The bottom has little bitty holes, and the top is just like a conventional straw. So generally what they will do is fill the gourd up with mate leaves. I would love, by the way, to have some fresh mate, or the chance at least to try some that's been recently processed, but maybe I'll have to do a little search around for that. But anyway, so they will fill the gourd up with mate leaves, and then I understand that sometimes some cold water is splashed atop those leaves and then poured out, I would imagine. Then the hot water is layered on top of the moistened leaves. So for these tea bags, I did put a little bit of filtered cold water on them, and then I put the boiling water on. So this, I suppose, is supposed to even out the flavor and take away some of the harshness, maybe the astringency, or maybe the bitterness. Caffeine-producing plants often, I think, can lead to a little bit of bitterness, maybe. But we love bitterness. We love processed chocolate and coffee for some of those flavor profiles. So, so this is my kind of adapted mate gourd with the traditional method of a splash of cold followed by the hot water. But maybe if I drank a lot of it, I would invest in some of the mate ware, but I don't really anticipate that happening over the next few months. Although I do enjoy it, let's try to give it a little bit of an objective look, and I'm going to consider it and review it a little bit. So this is what I would think is probably the preeminent brand on the American market, Guyaki. They've stretched out, as I mentioned, into aluminum canned mate products, which uniformly are good. I've enjoyed them. The little spritzers I wasn't really too happy with, but they had layered in so many flavors that the flavor of the mate was masked. But the tamarind lime one, gotta give it a go. Classic gold. We're having strict mate today. This is just the tea in the tea bags. They are like a bleached bag, it looks like. So they're very thin paper, so I don't really know the... I would be interested in what makes up the tea bag. I think that manufacturers should probably be more transparent about what's in their tea bags, what's the makeup of the tea bag. So it's a ground up plant, and when it hit the market, it was touted as having all these health benefits. And then I remember researching it long ago, and they were making mention of all these substances that were in it and how the caffeine was somehow different than the caffeine we're used to in tea and coffee. And I remember all these claims, and I think now they've rescinded all that, and then now that maybe it has a handle in the marketplace, or it got a foot in, they decided to kind of abandon their spin on it, which was tending to make it look like some kind of a unique product with a different type of a caffeine molecule. But at least when I looked it up a couple of days ago, it seemed to me that everyone has now admitted that it's just a lower dose of caffeine. Tea has more, depending on the way it's processed, and coffee, of course, has more, depending on the amount of processing or roasting or whatever. So I used 2 bags, and this is a hefty cup. This is probably, I would say 15 ounces at least of water, and 2 tea bags, and then the size of the bags, not too bad. It's a natural product. It's just just dried leaves processed into a very dusty kind of a bagged tea. I suppose once the mate leaves are dried, they just, they're not too dainty about it. They probably just crush them up and then they just throw everything into the bag. So even I get wisps of dust coming out of the package where I keep these tea bags stored. And I can see that there's lots and lots of dust, or what would be called in the tea industry fannings, mixed with very finely ground mate leaves and little bits of what are probably stems. And I did give it a sniff a moment ago. It's really tough for me to identify the smell. It's unique among products, tea products, and so I'm casting around for some kind of a descriptive term, and I'm having a lot of trouble here. It's unique. That's a plus, and it's not bad at all. It just has kind of a vegetal strangeness. Not a vegetal. If I was going to use the term vegetal to describe tea, maybe it's an adapted, or maybe it's a learned term for me. Maybe I've developed my own definition of what I would consider vegetal flavors in green tea, lightly processed, strict green teas. But this has a little bit of a different. It just struck me as kind of like having an earthiness, like an iron content, something that would be like. It certainly does have an earthiness, but it's not what I would consider like a dirt aroma. It's cooled to probably just about the perfect sipping temperature, but I'm going to try to evaluate the smell just a little bit more. Actually, I'm getting most of the smell off these bags. I suppose there's some small risk that I'm smelling the tea bag itself, but I don't think so. I mean, I have had loose mate. In fact, before I got these tea bags, I did have kind of one of the bulk 1-pounders, and then I think what I really am getting is kind of the strict aroma of the plant matter. Maybe I can describe it a bit more. Yeah, I'm just getting maybe a bit of stimminess, maybe a bit of sort of, I am sort of getting a sense of a combination of strict leaf matter and more of a woody texture, more of a maybe a stringier or a woodier plant matter texture. So I'm going to give it a little sip. It's a very good drinking temperature. I often will use 2 mate bags in this size cup. For me now, giving it a really evaluative review, it seems a little thin. The mouthfeel definitely has a little bit of a roundness. It's it doesn't stick to the palate. It moves up through the channels in kind of a nice way. It feels almost as if the fumes are reaching up into my hard palate and through it and into my sinuses, but there's not really a robustness to the actual liquid itself. It's more of like the feeling of the fumes combined with just a little bit of a maybe a little bit of a tannic mouthfeel. It's got a really bass note. Definitely, there's not really any tang of acidity, or that part of it is very subtle. So to me, it's got, maybe it's overused, but in this case, I do think it does have kind of a rounded flavor. It makes my palate feel pretty good. It's leaving sort of a tingly warmth on my palate. It's definitely not like tea. So there's something unique about the product, and I'm a fan of it. Really, there's very little that I can say that's negative. And I do really love to enjoy these natural products, undoctored, not really adulterated with sugars or anything. I would never dream of putting honey or sugar into this. I've gone through phases where I have used honey in tea, and I actually have some honey right now. I guess it was maybe a year and a half ago. I was eating a lot of honey. I was getting some really good natural honey that wasn't processed too much, like it wasn't pasteurized, and it had all the little all the little bee bits, all the little things that are usually sifted out of honey left in, and it was incredible. It was, oh, I've got, I probably will get a hold of a little bit more of that, but it wasn't suitable for tea drinking because it would leave gritty stuff all over the surface of your tea. But I also at that point in time had lots of other specialty honeys that I was using in tea, so maybe I'll adopt that again. But for most tea times, I would definitely be having raw, straight mate. And it's not disagreeable at all. It really does withstand a heftier sip, as well as kind of a light, shallow sip. I'm going to give it a good swallow right now and see if I can find any more descriptors about the flavor profile. Well, I'm going to clear my palate first. Actually, maybe I'll get a little bit of a fresher sensation. It's just got a really nice warmth. It's like when it's not really too cold outside, but there's maybe like through the window just a gentle breeze that has just a tiny amount of coolness in the air. very, very early autumn, maybe even like a summer night that's a little bit cool, and you pull a blanket over yourself, not just a sheet, but maybe a very, very, very thin blanket, like a cotton, definitely not an acrylic blend blanket or anything like that, just a very light blanket. That's kind of the sensation I'm getting. So it's a gentle flavor. It's got a natural flavor, and overall, this is a really positive sensation I'm getting, and it's a positive review. I would be interested in having some of the raw plant matter freshly dried, and maybe I'll investigate getting some of that in the future. So I do recommend it. If you've not tried mate, it's got a very light caffeination. It is helpful if you do want a very gentle lift. For me, it doesn't give me the problem that green tea often will. I'm sensitive to unprocessed green teas, where if I've not had anything to eat, if my stomach's empty, and I swill a bunch of green tea, oolong or black teas don't do this to me. So the unoxidized or relatively unoxidized green teas, those give me a lot of nausea. And I'm a green tea lover, and I drink a lot of it, gallons and gallons of it, but I have to have food in my stomach or I get very nauseous. This doesn't give me that effect. Maybe it's the particular drug cocktail and the very light caffeination, but every plant that produces caffeine has just kind of a different mix of chemicals in it, and this one doesn't seem to really bother my belly, so that's another point in its favor, because I'm due for some calories right now, and I know if I had drank this much green tea, I would feel quite sick. And the sickness that I get, the particular nausea from green tea, it's really bad. It's like it's a sharp nausea. It's very, very apparent. It makes itself known. It's really unpleasant, and I've often had a really, really sick physical sensation from green tea. But that's part of green tea's mystique, you know. It's beautiful stuff, and so is mate, and I do recommend it. So I hope you're all having a nice warm cup, staying warm in your homes. It's the temperature is dropping down to about 0 tonight, and last night was also quite cold, so I'm staying warm. I hope you all are too, and thanks for watching this mate review.